There's been plenty of attention on the things that the Dolphins 2024 roster still needs, but there's already quite the numbers crunch that awaits this team at the end of training camp. We're taking an early look at that here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substacks. You can find our shows here on the Locked On Network on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tip of the cap to our everydayers, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. We spent the first 2 days this week looking at the offensive guard position, specifically Liam Eichenberg and his projected role on the Dolphins offensive line versus some of the more top-name free agents that are still available out on the market. I spent my morning this morning watching Tracy Walker tape, the safety from Detroit that's been cut, that's still out there, in addition to guys that are very well established like Quandre Diggs and Justin Simmons and Deshaun Gibson. And there's actually quite a bit at safety that's still left out there. Miami perceived to have needs for a third safety as well. And those shows are coming down the pipe at safety. But that all that discussion to say, you can look at the Dolphins offseason roster right now and pick out the guys that say, hey, these guys were on the team last year, or alternatively, these are guys that you would think would have a strong case to be on the 53-man roster. And you get about 7 names more than you can fit right now before you add, hypothetically, if you get post-June 1st, another guard and another safety and probably another edge player, if we're being completely honest. The numbers crunch is going to be very real for this team. And that comes despite some favorable roster changes for an emergency third quarterback that can be elevated on game day off the practice squad every single week and not count against your elevations. That's a new change that's happened with the competition committee this offseason. So Miami last year, just as an example, they carried 3 quarterbacks all season on the 53. Now there's no limitation on how many times the practice squad quarterback comes up. So in theory, you would expect the Dolphins to carry 2 quarterbacks in season, unless you don't want to risk losing Skylar Thompson to waiver claims elsewhere. But if everybody's keeping 2 quarterbacks, I have a hard time seeing Skylar Thompson be like the number 2 somewhere else. So we're going to go through some names on each side of the football today and just kind of talk about the blockade and the challenges that this team faces. The 3 quarterbacks, I expect you'd keep 2 of them being Tua Tagovailoa and Mike White. And I am not of the school of thought personally that you would keep Skylar Thompson and save the money from Mike White. I think there's a big divide between those 2 players. And Mike White, even at the cost of $5 million as the backup quarterback this season, would still be my preferred choice, just because I think you review Mike White's entire body of work. There's been some starts here. There's been more big moments. I think there's more high floor play with Mike White than there is with Skylar Thompson. So you're going to keep 2 quarterbacks, presumably on the 53. You get to the running back room, Mostert, H.N., Jalen Wright, Alec Ingold, those guys should be considered locks. And then you get into Jeff Wilson and Chris Brooks. Savon Ahmed's the other back, and Savon Ahmed could be on a 53 somewhere. I think that time has played out in Miami. A lot of people want to hold on to the hope that Chris Brooks becomes something, but realistically, even if he beats out Jeff Wilson, is he anything higher than the 6th running back and the 5th running back in the pecking order? If you include Alec Ingold in that room? Probably not. Wide receiver, I think now with the addition of Odell and the 2 draft picks, you've got 8 guys that could have some kind of an argument to being on the 53. Hill, Waddle, Beckham Jr., Berrios, Craycraft, Ezukama, Malik Washington, Tyus Washington. You're not going to keep 8 wide receivers. I'll tell you that right now. You'll probably keep 6. So 2 guys off of that list are coming off. Is it Ezukama has the inside track for being a different body type and skill set, but he didn't play last year with a neck injury. Taj Washington and Malik Washington, 2 rookies. I think they'll probably battle it out with one another. I think there will be a definitive winner and loser in that battle. And then I think between Braxton Berrios and River Craycraft, perhaps those 2 guys battle it out for one spot as well. And Berrios, I think, has the inside track with what he brings in the special teams game. So you're at a numbers crunch there where in a perfect world, you'd love to keep all those guys. You're not going to. You get the tight end, Jonnu Smith, Durham Smythe. The team invested time and snaps last year in Julian Hill as a UDFA. Do you want to see that through? But do you commit a roster spot to seeing that through? I think Jody Fortson's a much better receiving threat. And if you're going to have Durham Smythe and Alec Ingold can play some of those H-back alignments, do you want the receiving threat with a third tight end? Do you only roster 2 tight ends? In which case, Julian Hill and Tanner Connor and Jody Fortson, none of them make the roster. It's an unenviable place to be. It's also a great place to be because it means your roster has some depth. Even the offensive line, as it currently stands, and there's some names that we're going to mention that I know are not the most popular names amongst Dolphins fans because the floor has not been particularly high. But just look at the tackle room. Teron Armstead, Austin Jackson, Kendall Lamb has been brought back. Patrick Paul is a second-round pick. And Keon Smith. Keon Smith, I think the growth that you saw from last year or the past year in 2022 to 2023, I don't want to give up on that project just yet, but he's realistically your 4th tackle at best. 5th if you give Patrick Paul as the draft pick the benefit of the doubt. So that's 5 tackles. Aaron Brewer, Isaiah Wynn, Liam Eichenberg. You just signed Jack Driscoll, Robert Jones. We're talking about another guard adding another guard that's 6 interior guys. That's 11 offensive linemen. I don't think any team ever has carried 11 offensive linemen on a 53-man roster. And that's when you get into guys that can play multiple positions, and the versatility and the benefit of that is to help you make some of those decisions. And I didn't even mention Lester Cotton, who played 600-plus snaps for the Dolphins last year. That'd be your 12th. He'd be my first off, but that's not really the point of this exercise. We're not doing a 53 projection. It's more so outlining, like, if they add another guard, you're realistically looking at potentially moving on from 2 or 3 guys, depending on what you choose to do with the skill players on just the offensive side of the ball. The bubble guys here, I mean, we'll get to the bubble guys at the end, but there's going to be bubble guys that I promise you there's going to be a lot of action. And that's what more so what this is meant to kind of outline is training camp's going to be high stakes. And guys that don't make it, don't count on a lot of these guys being practice squad guys. They're going to get opportunities elsewhere because they have legitimate arguments to be on 53-man rosters. We're going to go to the defensive side of the ball next, though, and we're going to look specifically at an edge group that has probably the numbers it needs, but you might have a guy who's starting on a reserve list at the beginning of the season. So is there an ad to be had there? A linebacker room that's as busy as it's been in quite some time in Miami. A secondary that we're talking about adding to as well. We'll get to all of that next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins, so make sure that you stick with us. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to win big and get a dub of your own because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet with FanDuel. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to make every playoff shot count with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. This is stressful. There's a lot of guys that like especially young guys that I want to see the opportunity through with the Dolphins. I want to see them have a chance to prove that they can play at the NFL level with the Dolphins, but I don't think all of those are going to happen. And maybe you get some of them back on the practice squad, but the numbers game here just, it's really nasty. I mean, I'm looking at 60 names for a 53-man roster, and that's before we know who some of the free agents that we're assuming the Dolphins are going to add to their ranks are. Just on the offensive side of the ball, if you add a vet guard, assuming you only keep 2 quarterbacks, I'm at like 20, 28 guys. I'm 3 over. 20. If you go 25 on offense, 25 on defense, and 3 on special teams or specialists for a long snapper, a kicker, and a punter, I'm in the red already. I don't even get to the defense side of the ball. You start with the interior guys, though. A lot of competition. The team obviously signed 7 interior defensive line guys. They have Brandon Peely as a UDFA from last year who made the initial 53. Does he get a look? I don't know. I think your inside track guys are Sealer, Gallimore, Tart, Benito Jones, Jonathan Harris. I feel pretty good about that group of 5 making it. Deshaun Hand, Brandon Peely, Davion Nixon, Isaiah Mack. I think there's less competition in my mind with that room, unless somebody far outperforms expectations, to decide like who the keeps and who the cuts are. But again, we're not doing the actual 53 now, but it's assume you keep 5 there. And then you get to the edge group. You got Bradley Chubb, Jalen Phillips, Shaq Barrett, Chop Robinson, Muhammad Kamara. I think all 5 of those have legitimate arguments to slam dunk, open and shut cases. The only saving grace you might get here is Bradley Chubb if he starts on IR or PUP. And remember, they did change the roster rules this year where before 53-man cuts, you can put a player on injured reserve and designate them to return, and they don't have to miss the entire season if they're not on the initial 53 and then put on IR. That's a new change this year as well. You get 2 of those, and they count against your 8 activations off injured reserve for the season. So Bradley Chubb, if they feel he could be back in a month, maybe he goes on IR. If they feel he needs a month and a half or longer, he could go on PUP, and that's a 6 weeks minimum. And that would get you a roster spot back either way for a 53 cut, because you can transition them. Now you can put them directly onto those reserve lists without having to cut to 53, include them on it, and then after 4 p.m., put them on IR, and then sign somebody who you just cut, say, hey, go wait out in the parking lot for 5 minutes until after 4 o'clock, and then you can come back and sign once we formally process everything and you're out of the building. That might help you out there, but either way, I think if Bradley Chubb's on the pup and it's Phillips coming off the Achilles, Barrett, Chop Robinson, and Muhammad Kamara, you'd probably like to have another vet guy. And it's hard to say what you can expect from Cameron Good coming off of the patellar tendon tear, I think is what his injury was. So you'd probably need another vet guy there. So you're talking 10 defensive linemen to go with the 11 or 12 offensive linemen we just got done talking about, and the 8 wide receivers and the 6 running backs in the running back room. You can see how the math is not mathing to get to 53. And that's before you even get to linebacker, where you got David Long, Jordan Brooks, Anthony Walker Jr., Duke Riley, Cam Brown, and Channing Tindall. I think Channing Tindall is certainly a name with a bubble consideration here, where how much grace do you get as a not top 100 pick coming into year 3? I think that switch is going to have to flip. I think the investments in Anthony Walker and Cam Brown, both of those guys signed for under $1.2 million. They're not guaranteed anything. Walker's a good player, but durability has been an issue there. Does that work against him? But Cam Brown, for the special teams prowess, do you keep 5 and keep Cam Brown in addition to the core of Long and Brooks as your starters, Duke Riley and Channing Tindall? Does he get some grace? Do you keep 4 and move on from the 2 guys with the least financial investment in Cam Brown and Anthony Walker and roll the dice with the rest of the special teams unit? It's not easy decisions. I think Channing Tindall will certainly need to show something this year in camp and in the preseason. I don't think the financial and the draft investment is so big as an outside of top 100 pick, even if it was a 3rd round pick, that going into year 3, if you don't show anything, then I think all bets are off. I think there's a lot of competition in that room that makes that tough to justify if you're going to cut loose somebody else just to say, oh, well, we drafted you 2 years ago. The corner room, I could see them keeping 6 there as well. I think there's 6 contenders in the linebacker room, but Ramsey, Fuller, Smith, Kohu, Needham, Bonner. Like, are any of those guys on the outs? Bonner, it seems like they really like Ethan Bonner. Is he a Tanner Connor player, or is he somebody who they're going to feel has gotten better and they want to continue to invest more into? And then safety, I think you look at Javon Holland, Jordan Poyer, Saron Neal as a special teams player who got a reasonable investment here. And then Elijah Campbell, plus the rookie and Patrick McMorris is the fifth player. We're talking about adding a third safety. I'd be surprised if they carried more than 4. So 2 of those guys are on the chopping block. And then you have your 3 specialists. So I get to over 53. I get to 56 just off of offense and defense before the specialists come into play. So I'm 3 spots over with all the names that we mentioned. And that you maybe get one back if Bradley Chubb starts on a designated list. But okay, now you're still 5 plus the 3 specialists. So your bubble guys, there's some significant traction for guys that I think many people just casually, you would look at the name and say, oh, he'll probably be on the team. It's probably not going to happen for some of those guys. We're going to explore who some of those names are. We've already alluded to some of them up next here on this episode of Locked on Dolphins. Stick with us. I'm going to do the Mike McDaniel and take a timeout. I'm glad I didn't take it in the first few minutes of the first quarter, but nevertheless, we're going to take timeout. Talk about Monopoly Go. I can hear what you're saying. Flag on the play. Kyle, you have talked about Monopoly Go all week long, but there is so much engaging content with Monopoly Go. And it's not just your competitive side. I want you guys to know that you can also collaborate with your friends and team up. You work together and build up each other's boards. And the more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's a lot to get, like unique stickers to complete albums, to trade and collect big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the board with, hilarious emojis for taunting your friends as you smash their buildings and heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. There's always timed events that help you win big, massive multipliers for everything you win, or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover on Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now, free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Bubble guys. This is assuming some signings. I think you're assuming either Bradley Chubb's good to go or you add a vet edge guy. I think you're assuming you add another interior offensive lineman. It's been reported that they have interest in that market, and they have alluded to having interest in the safety market. I think those are the 3 spots. They've already obviously gotten some acquisition going this week with the Odell Beckham signing, which was announced this morning. Names of interest to me that I would consider on the bubble: River Craycraft and or Braxton Berrios, Liam Eichenberg, Keon Smith, Lester Cotton, Channing Tindall, Jeff Wilson, Jody Fortson, Duke Riley, Anthony Walker, Ethan Bonner, Elijah Campbell, the Washington guys at wide receiver, Christopher Brooks. There's Jack Driscoll, I think, is another name worth acknowledging. Robert Jones. Those are not big investments at $1.79 million a piece. Brandon Peely, Deshaun Hand. Well, those guys were on the 53 last year. I would bet both of them are on the outside looking in right now, and that's before the other acquisitions. So of those names, just based off the math that I have outlined here, you need 5 of them to go for sure. And that's where I think the observation that I have is when you consider how the Dolphins chose to go about this offseason and not spending in Christian Wilkins territory and not spending in Robert Hunt territory. This is kind of the fruit of that labor. Because I maintained 12 months ago, if the Dolphins wanted to run the gang back together, They could run the gang back together. And if you don't believe me, go look at what the Cleveland Browns and the Philadelphia Eagles are doing. From a cash spending perspective right now, they are off the charts. Miami over the last 3 years, I believe, averages 8th in the NFL in cash spending. And the Browns were the only team last year that had surpassed $300 million in cash spending. This year, the Dolphins currently rank 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13th in the league in cash spending as things currently stand. Cleveland is spending $80 million more in cash this season than the Dolphins are. And that's not cap, because there's and Eric DeCosta did something with Adam Brenneman when a lecture recently talking about the cash to cap ratio. And Eric DeCosta obviously is the general manager of the Baltimore Ravens. And he talked about how for Baltimore, their sweet spot annually was to be between 6 and 10 in the league in cash spending in any given year. And they were high last year. I believe they were top 3 last year. Actually, I have these numbers. Let me go get these numbers. We'll float around and produce this thing while talking through the thought at the same time. I did this story on Touchdown Miami, and it was kind of exploring how the perception that Miami was all in was not necessarily an accurate perception, because all in, like, there is Cleveland, for example. Okay, they were first in cash spending in 2023, and they spent $30 million in cash more than Miami. Miami was 7th in the league in cash spending in 2023. The Dolphins in 2022 were 10th in the league in cash spending. And then the Dolphins in 2021 were 13th in the league in cash spending. And then this year, they're back to 13th in the league in cash spending. Now, when they do the Tua Tagovailoa contract extension, and if they get a Jalen Waddle contract extension and those things get signing bonuses, well, for Tua, whatever his signing bonus is, minus the $24 million he's on the books for, that's going to be added. I could very easily see Miami getting back up into the top 8 to 10 teams. But that's where the healthy balance exists, as was the quote that was described by Eric DeCosta in that lecture, where you're spending marginally ahead of what the cap affords you, but you have a healthy borrowing relationship between future years and current years. Now, if Miami went all in and pushed all the chips on the table, and they gave Christian Wilkins the crazy signing bonus, and they gave Robert Hunt a crazy signing bonus, and they paid Tua, yeah, they'd be pushing like San Francisco, Philadelphia. San Francisco's got $298.9 million in cash spent thus far. Philadelphia's at 328 and Cleveland's at 331. Miami's at 255, behind the Chiefs at 255, the Bills at 257, the Colts at 258, the Bengals at 259, the Titans at 260, the Jaguars at 265, Giants at 267, Falcons at 270, Texans 277, and then you're at the top 3 with 298 in San Francisco and up. The point being, by not investing in that regard, what the Dolphins have as a result is a roster that I do think is deeper. Oh, there were a number of UDFAs who made the team last year. And as I've been studying this UDFA class, I really have a hard time seeing a lot of very attractive pathways for UDFAs making this roster. And there's more names versus last year that I have on the offseason roster that I look at. It's like, man, I really don't want to cut that guy. But they're going to have to, with at least as things currently stand, assuming that they get their influx at safety and they get their influx in interior offensive line, and either Bradley Chubb's good to go or they sign another edge if he's not good to go. 5 guys that I actively don't want to cut, I'm going to have to cut. And you can bank on most of them probably not being back on the practice squad, because I think there will be opportunities for those guys to be on 53s elsewhere. So it's a really interesting kind of subplot as we continue to talk about, hey, the Dolphins still need this and the Dolphins still need that. And that's all true. It's true. But the domino effects in what is already going to be very difficult decisions in training camp. Hopefully, it provides this team with the depth that they need to absorb injuries throughout the course of the season and avoid the cataclysmic bottom dropping out that this team has experienced late in the year due to injuries in each of the last few seasons. We'll see, though. To be determined. That is going to do it for us here on this episode of the show. I hope you guys enjoyed a look at the Dolphins offseason roster and the numbers game that awaits. Got more content coming your way soon, so make sure you hit subscribe, come on back, and see us again. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Fins up. I appreciate you guys for checking out the show.